Your kids are practicing, learning how to be remarkable human beings. You and I are practicing as adults, no matter what field or discipline we're working in. But we're also practicing as a parent because there are no perfect answers. We're just showing up the best we can each and every day. And I commend you all for listening to podcasts such as mine. And I hope I'm not the only one that you're listening to, but to really learn and to be open to that learning. So what type or what style of parenting are you or will you practice?
Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, but here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home. So let's get started.
Hello and welcome back. This episode of Talking Toddlers, I'm going to dive into the word discipline. What does it mean to me? And how I've kind of redefined it over the years, based both in science and my real life experience as a clinician and a real life mom. I will spend most of my time today really demonstrating through examples of everyday challenges that you will or are or have faced with your toddler, and how I would use discipline, quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes there, to help successfully navigate those everyday challenges that we all face when we have young children. Well, and we also face when we have older kids, but today, 0 to 3. So let's take a quick minute to just look at the history of that word, because I think you could get 1,000 different opinions on what it is, what it's not, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. The Old French version was looking at punishment and suffering. The English version was looking at the branch of knowledge or the field of study, like what discipline do you study in college? And the Latin, the root word, which is where I come into, is what the student is, or the one who studies, right? Really looking at the student who is developing discipline. So how I'd like to really use that Latin definition, the one who studies, is how I apply it to babies and toddlers and preschoolers, that it's not a positive or a negative type of discipline, that we really need to look at how we, the grown-ups, how I'm always saying, are instructing and training and helping to shape our little ones. So that's what your toddlers need all day, every day, the training of how to develop that self-discipline in them. And I believe the best way to acquire and develop and hone those skills is through language-based learning. And I've talked a lot about what that first year and second year looks like through nonverbal communication and our behaviors, as well as the words that we're helping our children acquire. So last episode, number 48, which was entitled, Get Your Baby and Toddler to Listen Without Yelling, I touched upon this and I discussed the first stage of what we do with that 1-year-old and 2-year-old, that those skills we're introducing, there's a lot of hand over hand, and then things are emerging with that 2 to 2.5-year-old, where sometimes they do it properly and sometimes they crash and burn, right? But it's still a lot of practice. And much of last episode was based in the science, what's going on neurologically and how are those neural pathways being developed through their life experience, and how are we shaping that based on our behavior. And so, what I'd like to look at is what's appropriate or realistic with our expectations. And today, I'd like to look at how the parent, what's going on in your heart? What type or what style of parenting do you or will you practice? And I do use the term practice quite often in a lot of disciplines, but I use that because I think we're all practicing, right? Your kids are practicing, learning how to be remarkable human beings. You and I are practicing as adults, no matter what field or discipline we're working in. But we're also practicing as a parent because there are no perfect answers. We're just showing up the best we can each and every day. And I commend you all for listening to podcasts such as mine. And I hope I'm not the only one that you're listening to, but to learn and to be open to that learning. So what type or what style of parenting are you or will you practice? I don't advocate for permissive parenting, nor do I subscribe to authoritarian. And I believe I did an episode way back just about a year ago, I think it was number 13, that I talk a lot about the style of parenting and how can we be mindful of our interactions with our kids and other people in our family that helps define the outcomes, right? The American Psychological Association actually defines the type of parenting that I refer to as authoritative, right? That the parents are nurturing, responsive, and supportive, yet they set firm limits with their children, that they attempt to control children's behaviors by explaining the rules and discussing with them and reasoning, and that they listen to the child's viewpoint but don't always accept it, especially when you're dealing with a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, that they are trying to figure things out. So it's more about responding to everyday situations and not reacting to them. And I think that's the key to keep in mind here. It's not about, like I said last week, yelling or shaming or punishment or consequences, that it's really looking at the teachable moment, right? How to share with your toys, how to treat the pet dog, how to sit at the dinner table and eat civilized, and that all emotions are acceptable. Whether they're mad or frustrated or pissed off or hurt or feel guilty, all of those emotions are acceptable, but not all behaviors. And that's the key. And so we're looking at that tantrums or kids who are testing the limits and pushing back, that is all very healthy neurological growth and development, that they're trying to figure out how they can acquire some independence and still be a kid, right? Live in this family with some choice and opinion, to establish some security. That's why they're always pushing us. They want to make sure that we are secure. Kids really don't want these forever moving, squishable walls or boundaries. They want to build confidence, and they want to develop some reasoning skills, that they want to realize that, oh, if I choose to do X, Y, Z, then I might get into trouble, or he might not like me as a friend anymore. If I snatch his toy or steal something from his cubby, or if I push him down in the playground, or if I talk badly about him. All of those kinds of higher order reasoning things come from the experiences your kids are getting at 2 and 3 and 4. So let's look at some real life examples that you're probably facing each and every day on different levels. A pretty classic one would be on learning how to share or take turns, right? The big key in there is learning how to wait. And I talked a little bit about that last week. And that they're just beginning to develop and understand that whole object permanence, right? And so now when you're dealing with a 3-year-old who has more sophisticated language, they're really learning the social connection about taking turns and sharing and waiting. And that at that stage, at 3 and 3.5, they can really begin to use their words and advocate for themselves, whether they're the child who wants a turn at the toy or if they're hoarding it, right? So you could say something like, I know you wanted to play with that toy. It's hard to wait. I get it. So let's go see if we can find another one in the meantime to kind of fill in. And if there is a meltdown, if they can't really take it, then you can help them process those feelings. It's much harder when you're dealing with an 18-month-old or 2 and 2.5-year-old in dealing with those feelings with words, with description, because they don't really understand all of that. They're just feeling, right? That 2-year-old. But they also feel that vibration, that human connection when we sit down with them on the floor and they're having a meltdown. And you're just reassuring them that I know it's really hard being 2 sometimes, and it's tricky. And sometimes you just have to lay down and give yourself a good cry, right? And that's validating that sometimes life is really challenging, and that's okay. In a situation with slightly older children, that you can intervene if something is going awry, right? If there's a tug of war happening, especially if kids are a little less verbal, right? And they're maybe brand new 3-year-olds. And when emotions run high, then like all of us, no matter how old we are, our language processing, our ability to communicate can sometimes go and take a back seat. And so you can say something to your son or your daughter and say, I won't let you take that from Joey. He was using it right now. You will have a turn, but you have to give it back to him now. And so you have to use very clear, definitive language, helping them really work through this and feel the feelings, but still comply. Or feel the feelings or still do the right thing. Typically, in most cases, if the child feels validated and recognized that they're pissed off and they're mad or they're sad or disappointed, whatever it is, he or she will move on. And they might feel grumpy for a while, and that's okay. You acknowledge that. Like later on, you just give them a wink from across the room. And they'll be able to process that. A 3-year-old, a 3.5-year-old can do that. A 2.5-year-old, it's still tricky. And every child is a little bit different. And some children are more empathetic and more understanding. And others really need a little bit more pragmatic experience to kind of walk through that. So if you're in a situation and a toy, an object, whatever, has actually been taken and you have to step in and intervene, you could then say something like, looks like he was still playing with it. Do you want to give it back to him all by yourself, or do you want me to help you? And phrasing things like, do you want to do it all by yourself, or do you need mama's help? That's giving them the choice within your boundaries to do the right thing. And sometimes we need help to do it. And sometimes it's giving him a thumbs up so he can hand it to him. So he doesn't feel so all alone. So he doesn't feel like, oh, I screwed up. So suggesting, I can help you do that. A 3-year-old, a 4-year-old still needs a lot of help in social situations where there's a lot of personality, where there's a lot of movement and a lot of actions. A lot of stuff is going on in these play-based situations, whether it's in your house, in the backyard, at school, playground, t-ball, whatever you're doing. But if we kind of stay in this matter-of-fact tone, can you do it all by yourself or do you need mama to help? Is fine. There's no judgment. You have to practice that tone and get down with them. If you're tall and they're little, then you have to kind of be in that moment with them. Acknowledge their feelings, be gentle, give them that nudge, and be concrete with what the expectations are. So another common situation would be getting dressed. Again, your toddler, your 2, 3, 4-year-old will often need help. Now, some kids are pretty darn independent at an early age, and then more power to you. But I look at it as some of the non-negotiables, right? You have to brush your teeth, you have to get dressed, you have to take a bath once in a while. Some of those everyday kind of life things that we just do as humans. And so I think this situation, as in any situation, you can give them a choice, then that relieves some of their struggle with finding independence and their struggle in finding some kind of voice. And so you can say, hey, buddy, it's time to get dressed. Do you want your blue shirt or your green one? And then they will kind of step back a little bit with their energy if they're like, oh, all right, I'll just pick one. And that it's not, get dressed. I've told you 100 times, put your clothes on. Always remember, we want our kids to be independent. We want them to be able to think for themselves, but they have to have years and years of practice of making responsible choices. And at 3, it's time to get dressed, right? And sometimes you can say, I'll be back in 3 minutes. I'm just going to go pack my bag and I need you to be dressed. And sometimes it's just giving them that window and you're encouraging them to do it by yourself. Or if I come back and you're not ready, I certainly can help you, right? And sometimes it's also just giving them those kind of gestural cues or tactile cues. Here, put your shirt on. Here's one that you picked out. In the early days of my practice, I worked at a couple of different Montessori schools there in Pasadena, and I befriended a couple of well-trained teachers there. These 2 particular schools, one of their taglines was always, give the child as much help as they need and as little help as necessary. It's that fine dance again, right? To really help them gain their independence, feel like they have a say in this world, and yet get their stuff done and move on to the next step in your daily life, right? There's also part of the Montessori mindset is looking that I'm always here if you need my help. And that's how I have always worked with my clients as a therapist. And I hope I did that as a mom too, that I'm here if you need my help. But I see that you're doing a pretty darn good job, whether it's putting on your jacket or putting your stuff in your backpack. And you have to build in time in your day, especially when they're little, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, to give them enough time for this morning transition, which can always be a nightmare. And it doesn't always have to be in the morning, right? It's in the evening when you're getting ready for bed or you're getting ready to go to an event. And there are many strategies that I have used throughout the years, like a red clock or a visual reminder that this is what you have to do first, second, and third. And all of those kinds of external cues helps them not feel like they're being nagged or put upon. And that's really important. And if I can just take a side note here about getting out of the house, because I do think that can make or break any day, right? And a child, how they leave to school or to a play date or to dance class or to football practice or whatever they're doing. And then it also sets up for our day, right? So prevention is key, and to try your best to build in routines, because the more routines you can have in your day, especially in the morning, the more independent your children will become, and then the less heavy on you and the less stress in the air. And things can change. You don't have to be really rigid, but find the flow, this routine, that every day certain things happen in a particular order and that you can slowly pull yourself away. Help kids build that independence, that whatever the order of events are, you get up, you wash your face, brush your teeth, get dressed, go and eat, whatever works with you, that it's really important to find that routine. It'll change. It's going to be different with a 3-year-old versus a 5-year-old versus an 8-year. Of course, prevention is the best medicine in getting out of the house and not wanting to pull your hair out. And always remember, do your best to get down to their level, and that it's an eye to eye. You're building a connection, you're building a relationship, and to stay calm because they pick up on our angst and our stress. My challenge is getting out the door in my life experience was when our daughter became a teenager. And again, that was a whole different ball game, right? But she did have a good 10, 12 years of practice getting out the door and being independent. And I knew that we, both she and I, had it in us. Getting back to the really little kids, your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old, sometimes they just want to stay home, and you have to validate that feeling, but they still have to go to school, right? And so that's where you get down to their level, you stay calm, you really try to read them, you really try to figure it out, and you say something along the lines like, it really looks like you don't want to go to school today. And I understand that. Sometimes I don't really want to go to work either, but that's our job. That's what we do. So, I'm going to go and finish packing up my stuff and turn out all the lights. And then I'll be back in 5 minutes and you'll be ready by the door. And so you validate what they're feeling, but you also put it out there that this is what the expectation is. And so one of the key things also is that it's best to really be honest. And when kids are felt like they're being manipulated, like, oh, don't you really want to go play with Timmy today? Aren't you excited to go and see all your friends? Don't you want to play on gym set or go to art class or bring some cookies in? Because what you're doing there is you're kind of we are dismissing their feelings. And sometimes, we don't really want to get out of bed. Sometimes we don't really want to, get dressed. We want to stay in our pajamas. And so 9 times out of 10, you and we follow through. And so we have to recognize and validate their feelings and still help them go through that process. Sometimes kids do end up going to school in their pajamas, and I don't think I ever had to do that, but I've recommended it numerous times with clients over the years. I'm like, don't go getting sucked into that power struggle. It's like, okay, honey, with a 3-year-old especially, or a 4-year-old, if you want to go to school with your PJs on, that's totally fine. In the 90s and even early 2000s, it was kind of unique and special. Nowadays, lots of people go out and about with their PJs on, so that's not always that remarkable. Just putting that out there. On the flip side to this, a situation that could be part of the struggle would be leaving a place. So the flip side to getting out the door in the morning would be actually transitioning or leaving a place that they're enjoying themselves, like a party or the zoo or the local park. I think the vast majority of people out there understanding how a heads up, giving them a time frame, especially once they hit that 3-year-old or 3.5-year-old, they're beginning to build that concept of time because they've had the experience and they understand that their day is structured, right? And so they have that internal understanding of what 5 minutes or 10 minutes or one more turn on the merry-go-round or something looks like and feels like. And so it's important that we really start to utilize that. And if you see that your child is really enjoying themselves, then don't yell from across the room or across the park. That isn't always the most effective when they're just having the best time of their lives. Go to them and say, hey, it looks like you're really having a fun time on the slide. How about you have a couple more turns and then we have to get going? Or you could say something like, do you want to finish up here on the slide, or do you want to try one more turn on the teeter-totter before we get to go? But we have to go in 5 minutes. So you're, again, giving them a choice, giving them to make a preference, right? That it's not just yanking them and say, hey, we got to go now. It's really important to avoid that power struggle. But you have seen it, I have seen it, that sometimes it happens. And so, again, you have to be as calm as you can and as empathetic as you can and validate, I know you're having a hard time. I know it's really hard to leave the park when your friends are still here, but we have to go now. And then again, you could give them a choice. Do you want to skip to the car, or do you want to walk backwards to the car? Do you want to, hop like a bunny, or do you want to twirl like, I don't know, a ballerina? You can give them that choice, and that's always helpful, and it can be distracting enough. Or sometimes they'll run in the opposite direction. And you have to, hopefully by this time, by their third birthday, you have to prepare them. If you know that you have a strong-willed kid, then you have to prepare them going into it and say, hey, we're going to go to the park. We're going to play for 1 hour. It's 2:30 now. We're going to go for until 3:30. And I will give you a heads up. I'll remind you when we have 5 more minutes or 10 more minutes, whatever your window is. And then you have to follow through. You have to really be clear up front of what the expectations are. Give them the heads up. Be really gentle and firm with your voice, with your authority, quote unquote, right? But help them understand what the expectations are. And sometimes we do have to just pick up the kid and carry them to the car. And don't do your best to not have the meltdown in the middle of everybody else, because then they lose face, you lose face, everybody feels more horrible. And so do your best to pick up the little one. And I've always said this, and I think it's pretty logical, but picking up a 3-year-old and helping him learn what the boundaries and expectations are, and to have that self-discipline. It's not that I'm disciplining you, but it's having that self-discipline where they know that they're going to play for a certain amount of time and then they're going to go home and they'll be able to come back, next weekend. But you can then have a discussion or an emotional meltdown closer to your car and not in the middle of, looky-loos. So now I just want to cover 2 more everyday situations and then pull it all together, right? The second to last one is when your child tends to interrupt you. Say you're having an adult conversation and they tend to still be very egocentric, right? A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old. They're gaining better perspective of other people and understanding, but it's a learning process, right? It's a work in progress. You can often give them a gestural cue, putting your hand up or your finger up, tapping them on the shoulder, a tactile cue, and giving them that eye contact. You can take a pregnant pause from your conversation and help them understand, like, yes, I'm going to be with you. However, us adults over here are chatting. Give me a few more minutes. Sometimes you have to say that. Sometimes it's just a gestural cue, like a finger up and say, I hear you. I'll be with you in a second. And sometimes, stop your conversation, turn and say to them, I need just 5 more minutes and then I'm all yours. And that's true even if you're working, right? Say you're at the computer or at home or whatever, and they're interrupting you. And you turn toward them. You give them that eye contact. You stay pretty calm and cool and collected. And you say, yes, honey, I hear you. I want to go see the rabbit too, or I want to share that book with you. Give me 5 minutes and I'll promise I'll be right with you. And then you also have to follow through, right? We can't be weak on our promises because that's what we teach them. But in this scenario, if you're speaking with another adult, again, reassuring them that you're important, but this is important too, right? And again, helping your children understand how all of us can be together and live together. And I've been in scenarios where the friend says, oh, that's okay, let them. And I'm like, no, let me finish. And even if I just finish with 1 or 2 more sentences, it's giving them that internal experience that my mom is good on her word. And she finishes the conversation and then she turns toward me because I'm important too. But I'm not the center of the universe. I'm just important like every other human being, but I'm important to her. And so she follows through on my word. And so it is important to even demonstrate to other friends and family sometimes, no, she can wait for a millisecond or a minute or whatever. And it's just, again, we're all in practice and learning how to do this. And you hear similar themes in this, and you have to read each situation a little bit differently. But the primary thing is really going back to what type of parent do you want to be? What type of parenting practice do you want to practice, right? Do you want to implement? And really understanding that you have a choice, just like they have a choice. So the final real life example that I want to share is about transition to the dinner table. Again, we see these transitions. There's a theme. Getting out the door in the morning, leaving an exciting event, and then stop your plane or stop whatever you're doing and come sit down for dinner. That transition, if started early, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, every 6 months, they have a wealth of opportunities to hone these skills. So in this situation, again, giving your child a heads up and finding some routines in the morning, routines when you go out and visit other communities, routine to get to dinner, routine to help with dinner, routine to help with cleaning up with dinner. Again, there's a theme here. I believe in routines. I don't like to be surprised. And I've taught this thousands and thousands of times that your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old is really looking for understanding. How does my day unfold? How am I supposed to react in this environment if it's so disorganized or unpredictable? They're looking for predictability. And that's how we build our independence, right? If I can anticipate what's going to happen next, I know how to prepare myself. So when you give them a heads up, especially with those strong-willed kids, that dinner's going to be ready in 5 minutes, or better yet, I need help with dinner. Can you help set the table? That's a good heads up too, right? And I've talked a lot about this in building a healthy family style mealtime. And if we can start to implement some of these strategies when they're 1.5 and 2.5, then when they're 6.5, hey, it's time to help together as a family and put the dinner on the table. They might be doing their homework. They might be playing. And you can give them 5 minutes or 10 minutes to transition off of that and then come set the table. But the situation could be that your child is playing. Say they're outside doing chalk or playing in the water or something. And you could go out there and you could say, with very specific expectations, and narrate almost word for word, hey, dinner is going to be ready in 10 minutes. I want you to leave your chalk right there on the porch step and you can finish after dinner. And so you're not dictating to them, get in here, wash your hands and come to dinner, but you're helping them think through, what can I do? And it can be a win-win situation, right? We have to have dinner together. I am having fun out here drawing on the sidewalk. How can I do both? They need to comprehend how they can manage both. So again, depending on the age of your child, depending on their experience thus far, where are they? You're going to meet them where they are. But I'm always encouraging independence, whether they're 2 or 3, of course, with safety precautions, right? But if they can help set the table, if then they can climb into their chair themselves, if you're not just picking them up, if they're playing with their blocks or their trucks or their dollies or whatever, hopefully not with an iPad, but you just say, oh, it's dinner time and pick them up and scoop them up. I know a lot of parents, especially busy parents and parents who just simply and innocently don't understand that a 2-year-old has a lot of language, a lot of wherewithal, but if they're abruptly scooped up and put in their high chair, that does not help them comprehend. And it's too startling. And so it's really important to help give them a window for this transition period. And that I always say that dinner time shouldn't have distractions. You can have light, playful music on the background, but no screens, no TVs, no big radios, that it should and can be a wonderful experience for all of you to help prepare that, sit down, share the meal, clean up, right? Then the child is going to participate and they're going to be engaged with their eating. But say your child is done. Maybe they're not very hungry that day and they want to get out. Sometimes you can say, well, you have to wait until the rest of us are done. That doesn't always blow over all that well. But you can say you can take your plate to the sink or to the counter, but also understand that if you're done eating, you're done eating. You can't come back for more. So you decide whether you're hungry now or full now. Or if they start to act up and mess around with their food at the table, and then you say things like, oh, it doesn't look like you're hungry anymore. You can take your plate to the table or take your plate to the counter and then, go finish your homework or look at a book or go finish your chalk design or whatever. But they might realize that, oh no, I'm not done eating. I'm still hungry. And they might settle back in their seat and finish whatever they were served or whatever they selected themselves. And so it's not that you're calling their bluff, but you're bringing their attention back to what's happening. And so it doesn't become a power struggle. You still have a choice. If you're done eating, you can leave and I'll take your plate or you can put it on the counter. But if you're not done eating, then, finish up and act nicely and eat politely and don't play with your food and don't get distracted. And so again, you're helping shape their attention to the task and help shape getting things done in a timely manner. So my purpose today was to give you real life experiences that you all are living through. I know. And if you haven't yet, if you still have a baby in your arms, then you will shortly. And these are things that we manage from day one and that it evolves over time. And I just kind of want to wrap today's episode up with the discussion or the the theory of timeouts. And perhaps as a new mom, new dad, new grandparent, and if you're an advocate of timeouts, that you'll kind of reconsider. Because my theory has always been it's not helpful for our little ones, our 2-year-olds, 3, or even 4. Maybe once they get school age, depending on the situation. But if you haven't used them when they were really little, then I don't think it's something that you would rely on when they're older, that you have gone through the first years with respecting them and validating their feelings and building a healthy relationship, a communicative relationship, where you've given them boundaries, you've helped them develop some autonomy, some independence, respected their opinion at least, not always agreed with it. But by the time that they're 6 or 7 or 8, you could have natural discussions. I was kind of surprised when I started my practice, and they were pretty darn popular. And I was surprised because I'm thinking, no 2-year-old or 3-year-old or even 4-year-old is going to sit in the corner or sit in his room or sit in a special spot and contemplate their behavior. It never made sense to me as a language therapist that worked so well. I've had a lot of really close colleagues who were clinical psychologists, and they really looked at it as it increased shame or guilt and a lot of confusion. I looked at it from a language processing. They didn't have the cognitive skills to think through their quote unquote bad behavior or the circumstances. And so it just never made sense to me. I think it's more important that we're building a long-term solution and that kids ultimately we all hopefully think about our behaviors and our personal choices, and that we can contemplate them and say, whew, if I had that to do again, I would do it differently. But when we're talking about toddlers and preschool age, I think it's really important to help them walk through what they could do differently or what doing XYZ didn't serve anyone. And it's not that we would give them big fat lectures, because sometimes I can certainly talk too much. And I know a lot of parents can, and all of that goes over the kid's head too. And so I think if we start with small steps, hoping to build long-term abilities, then you're really building their confidence and you're building their competence to think through things. And sometimes these timeouts can occur when someone really loses it. They have just a big meltdown. And last year, as I was closing my practice, I had a couple of families that I had been working with for a couple of years. So they came to me when they were approaching their second birthday, and I had been with them for 2 or 3 years. And now the kids were a little bit older. This one particular family had a young girl who was turning 5 and ended up having pretty sophisticated language, but she had a lot of social issues. She was a little impulsive and she didn't have really good people skills. And the parents were always putting her in timeout from the beginning. And I was never able to convince them otherwise, because this young girl she was pretty darn smart and she had pretty sophisticated language. And they just simply thought that she should, quote unquote, know better. And it was really hard for me to work through with myself, because sometimes as a therapist, I just simply have to kind of let go. We had a good working relationship, and the young girl, when she came to me, she wasn't talking at all. And so she really did have a good team to support her. I was saddened that, and this was a lovely couple, a lovely family, and they had another younger son. But to them, it was just this young girl who had rich language and had a heart of gold, but she was very impulsive. And part of her difficulty was she was very egocentric. She was classified on the autism spectrum, but significantly high functioning. But it was very interesting that they used this method for years with very little progress. And yet that was their parenting style. And so I share this because I think in the long run, it would have served her as it would serve all of us if we help them through, whether it's sharing a book or social stories or another life experience, or perhaps some time when, you could demonstrate when you lose your temper and you get mad and you talk through how you could have done it differently. So there's a lot of different techniques that we could use to help a child understand that throwing a fit or getting mad at someone or yelling or hitting or kicking or any of those things aren't the best method to choose. So consider how timeouts perhaps is not the best form to use, especially when your kids are really little, and that the more heads up and time that you could give them, the more positive reinforcement when they do something well, and then they can really understand what the expectations are. The key here is really to go back and understand that all emotions are acceptable. They really are. There's no wrong or right emotion, but it's the behaviors that we have to work through, and that there are better ways to express those emotions and give them a lot of opportunity to really practice those. And to use that word again, we're all in practice. So I hope that this shines some light, that you're not alone, that we're all dealing with these everyday kinds of things. I think it's better to go back to the definition of the Latin root word for discipline, that is the one who studies, and that our children are studying under our guardianship, and that we are helping them build self-discipline and concrete or critical thinking, not concrete thinking. Right now, they're at a very concrete age, right? And so we're trying to help them build that into more critical thinking and to be able to process what's happening now and what do I have to do next to do the right thing or to do the next better thing, right? And so it's a process. So thanks once again for spending time with me and listening and building your skills as a new parent, a new mom, new dad. And I know it's not always easy. I'm excited for what is unfolding for this summer and into the fall. And it would be such an honor if you would be so kind to take a minute and leave an honest review and a rating on Apple Podcast. That's how social media works, right? To push my content out and reach more parents and build a community where we all get together, like-minded people, that we work together to do the best for our kids and for the future kids. God bless you, and I look forward to next week. Take care. Bye-bye.